we have to move from metoo to wetoo. Metoo was important. Metoo is important. Standing against sexual harassment of anyone, whether it's gay actors in Hollywood, whether it's women in Hollywood. Right? The casting couch is an equal opportunity sexual harasser. We have to stand against all forms of sexual abuse with complete, utter dignity and passion and goodness and beauty. We have to be careful, right, to make distinctions, not to make ordinary or normal mistakes in the normal arc of human relationship into abuse. Got to be very, very careful. Right? There are, as Matt Damon correctly pointed out, there's a hierarchy. Right? There's a field. There's a right. Not everything is the same. Right? Rape, right, is not the same as an unwanted advance. It's not the same as a flirtation across the room. Right? Saying to someone, "Man, that's a really nice dress," or "You look really great," is not the same as rape. So if that's inappropriate in the workplace, which it may or may not be depending on the situation, we got to decide whether we want to be in a workplace where no one can say to me, "Hey, you look great today." Do we want to be in that workplace? We got to think about that a lot. Right? We got to think about, do we want to disenchant the workplace? Do we want to live in a workplace without allurement? Do we want to live in a workplace without eros? Right? I don't. And I would say 99.9% of the people in the workplace don't. So how do we create safety, right? Integrity? How do we stand against inappropriate harassment and at the same time allow for allurement? Allow for the dance of eros. And particularly, just to be clear, right? When people aren't meeting at church, right? And they're not meeting at the synagogue, and they're not meeting at the community center, so where exactly are they supposed to meet? On Tinder? Right? Why aren't we supposed to meet in the workplace? And why aren't we supposed to be attracted to each other in the workplace? Why would we want to be in a workplace without attraction? Right? Without a drive towards intimacy? Without allurement? Right? That's an insane idea. To de-eroticize the workplace, right? To empty the workplace out of its natural allurement and to suggest that people should just meet on apps is insane. But more than insane, it's devastating, right? It's degrading, right? It actually deconstructs the core eros of reality, and all collapses in ethics come from failures in eros. So if we de-eroticize and sanitize, as it were, society, if we sanitize society, we make it insane, because intimacy is sanity. And we're moved towards intimacies. Now, how we navigate those intimacies, let's talk about it. That's a great conversation. Do we want to live in a world in which someone can't make a forward advance without being accused of sexual harassment? That's a good question. Well, what if I make a movement towards you and you say no? And then you report me to human resources. Okay, let's think about that. How does that work? So we've got to think about this deeply, right? Does a woman have a right to ask a man out at work, right, if she's his superior? That's an interesting question. That's a really good question. Does a man have a right to ask a woman out at work if he's her superior? And why is it that most women don't want to go out with the male clerk? What's that about? Right? There's lots of issues here. Right? Power in the workplace is distributed in many and complex ways. What metoo says that's vital and important is A, you cannot touch my body. You cannot look at me in a way that's ogling or degrading or demeaning just because you think you have a right to. You don't. Gorgeous, gorgeous. And has that been a shadow of some expressions of the masculine? Of course it has. Do we need to actually make that completely out of bounds? Yes, we do. Is the metoo movement a momentous leap in the evolution of intimacy? From that perspective, of course it is. Fantastic. Now let's take the next step. And the next step is critical. The next step is that we begin to say and to realize that we don't believe in collectivism. You know, neo-Marxism, right, and collectivism said you can talk about people as groups, not as individuals. In America, collectivism meant racism. Let's talk about African Americans as a community. Let's talk about Jews as a community. Let's talk about Italians as a community. Now we get that's not okay. There are individual human beings who are gorgeous, unique configurations of intimacy, who are not defined by their birth, by their origin. Where I originated from doesn't define my destination. And I can actually claim a destiny which is very, very different than my point of origin. And you can't identify me, right, because I share certain characteristics with a larger group of people. That's racism. That's anti-Semitism. So why would we possibly think that we can define either men or women as a class? The women. Really? Really? What a tragic mistake. Women are all, really? Men are all, really? Women are all way too emotional to hold responsible jobs. Men are all predators and not to be trusted. Let's believe all women. Let's trust all men. That's nonsense. Let's talk to each man and each woman and understand that the feminine is not the pure and the masculine is the degraded. And if only we could help those poor men caught up in their degraded structures of desire, which are inherently problematic and violating, and they're stuck in this sick cycle of desiring penetration, right? Those poor, deluded, degraded, predatory men, maybe we can heal them. No, I don't think so. Men are gorgeous. Men are stunning. Men are beautiful in every possible way, in so many expressions. Whenever I think about men, I think about when I was writing my doctorate in Oxford, and I would look out the window early on Friday morning, and my apartment was right next to a bank, and there would be their Romanian men who would start lining up at 3 a.m. Long, long lines, and they were there to wire their paycheck to their wives and children in Romania, and they were working in England, working 18 hours a day, right? Living these just hard, painful lives in utter devotion to their women and children. That's just one image, right? Sometimes I think about Tom Hanks and that gorgeous movie he made way back in the day. What was it called? Saving Private Ryan. And you see men pouring out of the boats onto the beaches of Normandy, getting mowed down, right? Mowed down by machine gun fire. And they just keep pouring out. Boys, pouring out. These are men. These are men. These aren't predators pouring out. These are men, right? And so, whoa, let's be in adoration. Let's be in devotion to the masculine. And let's be in adoration and devotion to the feminine, which is so gorgeous in so many stunning ways, the radiance of the feminine, right? The wisdom, the nurturing, right? The compassion, the insight, the discernment, all of it, right? So let's be womanizers and manizers, right? We've degraded both of them, right? Right? A woman who wants to be with too many men, she's a slut. Right? A man who wants to be with too many women, a womanizer. Whoa! Let's take it beyond sexuality. Let's talk about just being delighted, blown heart open by the beauty of woman. Right? I am a womanizer. Let's be blown heart open by the beauty of men. I am a manizer. Right? Wow. And for some people, it might be about a particular style of making love with a lot of people. For other people, it might be about this gorgeous monogamy, right? For 47 years or 93 years of marriage with one person, but I'm in love with the feminine, even though I'm married to one woman, but I'm in love with the feminine. I'm married to one man, but I am in love with the masculine and the quality of line in the world and the quality of circle in the world. So we need to just deconstruct the utterly absurd idea that the masculine is the degraded, the feminine is the pure. Both masculine and feminine are origin points in the human story, and each has enormous light, enormous gorgeousness, and shadow. There's feminine shadow, and there's masculine shadow. And both the feminine and the masculine have to work on seeing their shadow, integrating their shadow, evolving their shadow. That's part of becoming intimate with myself. Intimacy means I'm intimate with all my parts. So if I'm feminine, I got to be intimate with all of my shadow and all my light. And if I'm masculine, I've got to be intimate with all of my shadow and all of my light. For example, can groups of men do something terrible? Of course. Can groups of men do something gorgeous? Of course. Let's take the shadow side. A lynch mob of men. That's a horror. All the men are in. Does that make them right because there's a lot of men? I don't think so. Can groups of women do something beautiful, gorgeous? Of course. Can groups of women do something terrible? Of course. There can be a feminine lynch mob. Why would we think there can only be a masculine lynch mob? Right? Because there's a group of men, we don't automatically believe them. We check the evidence. We check the social relationships. We check how do they know each other? We check how the meme, the negative meme, was created between them. We check what the other motivations might be. We look at the structure of relationship and at all the hidden agendas that might exist in order to understand, is this group of men in integrity or not? Same thing with a group of women. We check the motivation. We check the relationships between the people, the hidden agendas, right? The ulterior motives, right? The other forces that might not be visible to the eye. We check evidence. We check facts, both with groups of men and groups of women. We don't believe all the men. We don't believe all the women, right? We actually engage in the single most important, momentous advance of love, and it's called human rights. It's called democracy. See, those boys dying on the beaches of Normandy, they didn't die for baseball, with all due respect. They didn't die for Monday Night Football, with all due respect. They died for fair process. They died for innocent until proven guilty. They died for how we gather information about each other and make judgments. A society is defined by how it gathers information, discerns between depths and superficialities of information, and forms its judgments, whether that's in a court of law or whether that's trial by internet. How we gather and evaluate information is the essential evolutionary leap of love that defined human rights and democracy, and that's why we died on the beaches of Normandy. So to suggest that we believe all the women, or that all the men are predators, or that we believe all the men and we disbelieve the women is absurd. That's actually a regression to pre-feminism, to pre-human rights, right? To a kind of Salem witch trial, sometimes by internet, sometimes by fire, which actually begins to dominate our trial, which begins to dominate our public discourse. We don't want to let superficial aphorisms like, where there's smoke, there's fire, define the day. Where there's smoke, there's fire is not a legal construct. It's not a discernment of information. It's not an intimate construct. It could be where there's smoke, there's fire. It could also be where there's smoke, there's a smoke bomb. It could also be where there's smoke, there are some embers, ordinary mistakes in the normal arc of human relationships that are fanned into fire by malice or other hidden agendas. All of these need to be taken into account as we move from me too to we too, and we actually look for the new and the higher intimacy, for men and women to be able to love each other madly and to make love with each other passionately and without fear. We don't want to create this erotic chill, right? In reality, by making men and women afraid of their own allurement towards each other. We don't want to make men afraid of their allurement to men, women afraid of their allurement to women, men and women afraid of their allurement to each other. We want to live in a world which is alive and hot and beautiful and filled with integrity. Because integrity is hot. But integrity is not placid, and it's not flaccid, right? And it's not banal, right? And it's not homogenized, and it's not neat. It's messy, and it's complicated, and you got to work with it. And you got to be willing to not actually create a victim identity, but to have an identity which is a unique self, a unique configuration of intimacy, desired by all of reality. So we love Me Too madly. We are in deep devotion and honor to the momentous leap of love that is Me Too. And we want to move from Me Too to We Too.